Okay, so I watched the Strip Down Rise Up documentary and I have some thoughts. Hello and welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and today I am going to be talking about my thoughts on the Strip Down Rise Up documentary that was recently released on Netflix. Okay, so for those of you that have not seen the documentary, what is it? So Strip Down Rise Up is a documentary, like I said, produced by Netflix. It was released I think a couple of days ago, so pretty recently, and the tagline of the documentary is that in an effort to reclaim their bodies and lives, a group of women explores the intersections of movement and meaning in a powerful pole dance program. And basically this is a documentary that's supposedly about pole dancing, and it features a woman called Sheila, who is the owner of S Factor Pole Dance Studios, and it is pretty much like following a group of students that come to her studio and go on this 6-month program in order to kind of, like they said, reclaim their bodies and explore the intersections of movement and meaning, that whole jazz that they were talking about. In addition to featuring Sheila, it also features another pole studio owner called Amy Bond, and she owns a studio that is much more focused on the pole sport and competition aspect of pole. So it kind of follows, it talks a bit about her and how she got into pole and how she became a studio owner, and then it also follows her as she's like training for a particular competition that she is preparing for. And then there's also a short feature on Janine Butterfly, who is a very well-known pole artist in the pole community, and it again talks a little bit about how she got started in pole and how she kind of became involved with pole, and a little bit about her journey as well. But that's only like a very short segment of the documentary. Amy is featured a little bit more heavily, but the majority of the documentary is focused on Sheila and this group of students that she is taking on this 6-month journey through pole dancing classes, basically. Okay, so that's like the 1-minute synopsis, 1-minute recap of what the documentary is about. If you want to kind of know fully what I'm talking about it, I would recommend like watching the documentary before watching this video, but I am going to try kind of explain like what I'm talking about and what I'm referencing in the documentary as best as possible as I go through the video. So with that out of the way, let's get into the problems that I had with this documentary. So the first problem that I had is that how much the documentary itself focused on Sheila, and not just how much the documentary focused on Sheila, but how much the 6-month journey that these women were supposed to be on and the classes that they were taking were focused on Sheila and what Sheila thought was like best. So Sheila basically she's I think a former actress, and she then found pole and started pole dancing, and she had this like amazing, inspiring, remarkable breakthrough and journey through pole dancing, and now she wants to kind of give that gift to other like women, and that's why she does these like 6-month programs. But it almost seems like Sheila herself like had this like amazing experience with pole and this amazing breakthrough, and it was very like an emotional and like almost spiritual journey for her, and now she is kind of, it seems like she is taking that and projecting her experience onto all of these other women that she is kind of facilitating through these classes, which obviously we are all different people and we're all going to experience the world and in different ways, and we're all going to have our own different journeys. So I feel like Sheila's like model is very like cookie cutter in the way she treated these women, and I feel almost like she was treating these women like how she would want to be treated and what she thinks would have like worked for her, and projecting that this will now work for all of these women, regardless of the type of trauma that they've experienced, the type of PTSD they might have, which I'll get into in the next like problem that I have with it. but yeah, it just seemed like very Sheila centric, very much about her and what she thought was best. And although it, like, the documentary was supposed to be following these women on their journeys through these classes, it very much seemed like these women were more so just props for Sheila to show how great she is and how great her program is and how great her classes were, if that makes any sense. And that brings me to my second issue that I have with this documentary, and that is the classes at S Factor were more like group therapy sessions than actual pole classes. And not only that, but Sheila and her instructors are not qualified therapists and were not, in my opinion, equipped to handle the level of trauma that they were particularly bringing up in these classes and in these sessions. There were a lot of these women that were coming to do this program because they had some sort of trauma or something in their lives that they wanted to overcome. There were particularly quite a few girls that spoke about their experiences with molestation, sexual assault, and rape, which is something the documentary really should have included a trigger warning for, because a lot of them went quite into detail with their stories and their experiences, which I'm not saying like that is a bad thing that they like went into detail about that, but it could have been very triggering for viewers watching that, not expecting that because there was no sort of trigger warning. There was also particularly a woman that was followed that was dealing with losing her husband, the death of her husband, and she was going through like a grieving process. And Sheila and the instructors would particularly bring up these issues in the classes, in the sessions. So they would particularly like encourage the women to talk about these things, encourage them to kind of bring up their traumas and share them with the group, which like in and of itself, like talking about your traumas is not necessarily an issue, but it's the fact that Sheila and these instructors were bringing up these issues with not having the proper training and the proper certification in order to be able to deal with the ramifications of bringing up that trauma. And this kind of like intersects with the whole thing of like it being all about Sheila, is like from a perspective of like being trauma informed in your teaching. I've spoken to my mom actually about this because she's done like quite a bit of research and on trauma informed yoga teaching, because she is a yoga teacher. And what I've learned from her is that through like trauma informed yoga like teaching and trauma informed teaching in general, is you're really supposed to just hold like the space for the person. You're supposed to make suggestions of what they might do in order to feel better, and not telling them. And something that I actually discussed with my mom was that a lot of these women are coming from places where they had been like violated or victimized in some sense, and they maybe had felt like they had lost some of their power and didn't really have that power within themselves. And now, instead of Sheila kind of just providing a space where they can explore and kind of facilitate their own journey, Sheila was now telling these women, okay, this is the right way to heal, and this is what you have to do in order to heal. And like I kind of like really like made the connection when I was like talking about this with my mom and like hearing about this trauma informed approach, is that that is actually another way of taking the power away from someone, is telling them that there's only one right way to heal, and that this is the exact things that they have to do in order to be able to heal, which was a lot of what Sheila was doing in the documentary. So now not only might the person like feel like powerless from whatever trauma they've experienced, but now they've also had the power of their healing journey taken away from them as well, because they're being told, okay, this is, you have to follow my instructions in order to be able to heal properly. So that I found a little bit problematic. Again, I'm not the most like informed on this. This is just based on like some conversations that I've had. I would actually love to see an actual like therapist or someone who's like properly qualified in this area to like talk about the documentary and some of the problems with kind of Sheila's approach, because I'm sure there's more than just what I've kind of been able to pick up on and what I've kind of seen with it. But yeah, I think overall Sheila's whole approach, like in addition to like being like very focused on her and not so much on the students themselves, was very like potentially dangerous for these women in their journeys, and potentially not the best way for them to like go through a healing experience. And at one point in the documentary, they actually bring in a therapist. They bring in a therapist to talk to Sheila and the instructors, because they kind of acknowledge that a lot of the things that are being brought up in these classes are very traumatic and are difficult for these women to deal with, and there might be some like ramifications from that. But that kind of just showed me that they like acknowledge that there's a problem, but they didn't really take any action to fix it. Like, yes, they spoke to this therapist, but why not have the therapist come in and actually sit in on the classes and actually be there to help these women? Why not have that actual qualified person who's qualified to deal with these emotional issues be there in the room if you are the one that's going to insist on bringing them up? So either have the qualified person there and use them and use their expertise to facilitate this healing journey that you want to take these women on, or don't force them to bring up their traumas in class. So that's my perspective on that whole aspect of it. And on the topic of Sheila and her instructors not being qualified, that kind of brings us to the third issue that I have with the documentary, was that not only are they not qualified therapists, they don't seem very qualified pole instructors either. The technique that was shown in the documentary at the S Factor studio was atrocious. There have already been so many memes made about the technique from that studio, like in the pole world. If you are a pole dancer, you probably follow Pole Lulz on Instagram, run by Dan Rosen. He's made some really great memes on the documentary already, but it to a certain extent is funny to like laugh at like the way that these girls were like climbing the pole, for example, with both feet behind instead of like using proper technique. But it is also like dangerous. Like, it's not just like, oh haha, they're using bad technique. Like, this is something that could actually injure someone like in the long term. The way that they were spinning, like they were doing these spins on the poles that I don't even know what spin you would call it, because it doesn't look like any like spin that at least I've ever learned. Like, it doesn't look like a proper fireman spin, like it doesn't look like a proper chair spin, it doesn't look like anything. It's kind of just them throwing themselves around the pole, which is like, it's not like safe. It's not safe practice. As a pole dancer, like something really important to learn is how to stabilize into your shoulders, how to, when you're holding onto the pole, engage into your shoulders and make sure you're pulling your shoulders into your socket so that you're not going to get injuries. Also with their inversion techniques, like I have been told so many times by my instructors, don't like do a huge kick up into your invert. Don't do like a running leap into it, because if you have to do that, you're not ready to invert, you're not strong enough to invert, and by doing that you're just going to injure yourself. The way they were climbing as well, like they were teaching beginners to climb with both feet behind the pole instead of 1 foot in front and 1 foot behind. And not only is that a super like difficult way for beginners to actually learn how to climb, I don't think that it's like the safest thing to teach a beginner, because they don't have as much like security, they don't have as much like contact points in contact with the pole, because they're missing like their whole like back of their calf of the front leg in contact with the pole. And yes, that might be something, like I tried climbing like that for a TikTok video actually, and it might be something that when you are more advanced and you know the proper grip between your knees, that you can do fine. But I just think it's a bit irresponsible to be teaching, actually not a bit irresponsible, very irresponsible to be teaching beginners who have no idea what they're doing on the pole with that kind of poor level of technique. It's not safe, it's not responsible. Also in the documentary, I did not see any like hint of like warming up properly, conditioning properly, teaching like the girls anything about like how to stabilize properly on the pole, or what muscles that they should be engaging on the pole. None of that like technique aspect was present at the S Factor studio, and that I think is just like a really like dangerous thing. Like there's no really excuse for that level of technique. And like in this kind of day and age where there are so many pole studios that are able to teach girls with like the correct technique, who have instructors that are properly certified, like there is no excuse for S Factor to still be teaching like that. I know that I've seen kind of that the technique of climbing with both feet behind the pole is something that does come from strip clubs, and when strippers were teaching themselves to pole, and that I understand, like you're teaching yourself, you don't know better. But if you are being trained by a supposedly qualified instructor, they should know the best and the correct technique to be teaching you so that you don't injure yourself. So that is like a huge problem that I have with that. And kind of with all of these problems that I had with the documentary, specifically with like the S Factor studio part of it, I worry that because the documentary as a whole was so focused on the S Factor studio and what was going on at the S Factor studio, that although there were the segments that did talk about the other aspects of pole, and that talked about Amy's studio and talked about Janine Butterfly, that because so much of it was so heavily focused on S Factor, that is the impression that people are going to get of what pole dancing is, when in reality that is like the kind of S Factor method is such a small niche within the pole community. No studio that I've like ever been to, and I've been pole dancing now for 6 years, has ever like been anything close to like what S Factor is. Like the studios that I've been to, it's been about the pole, it's been about learning the technique, it's been about learning the tricks. It hasn't been like this this facilitated journey, this like almost group therapy-esque thing. And I feel like as a result of this documentary, people might start to conflate that with pole dancing as a whole, and that kind of leaves like a bad like taste in my mouth, really. Like I get that like the S Factor thing might be beneficial for some people, and some people might find that like good, despite all the problems that I have with it, because like my criticisms, like I still stand by those criticisms. Some people might still find it useful, but again, it's such a small minority of what the pole community is actually about. And like I said, this is one of the like, pole is such an underrepresented sport and such an underrepresented like fitness discipline, that this documentary it has a huge platform to kind of educate people about what pole is like. And I feel like, yeah, again, because it was so heavily focused on Sheila and her S Factor classes and the S Factor method, that's what people are going to think pole is all about. Okay, so now what I actually liked about the documentary. Pretty much all of my problems that I have with the documentary come from the Sheila S Factor side of it. I actually really enjoyed the rest of the documentary that was focused on Amy and her studio, as well as the parts with Janine Butterfly as well. I found those really interesting, and I really enjoyed those parts of the documentary. I particularly loved Amy's story. I found it really interesting. I'm actually not gonna spoil it, so if you want to watch the documentary and see like Amy's story and her like journey, I think that was like a really great story, and also really well told from the part of the documentary. I loved Janine Butterfly's part and how she kind of explained how she got started in pole and how it started in the strip club, and I really appreciate that the documentary like included that part, that pole actually comes from strip clubs, and some of our most renowned artists in the pole industry got their start in strip clubs. And that's something that we should, as pole dancers, we shouldn't try to divorce ourselves from that and say like, oh no, pole isn't about stripping, pole isn't about strippers. We can acknowledge that there's a huge amount of diversity in the pole community, and that not everyone who does pole is a stripper, but it's still important to acknowledge that that is where pole came from. It started in the strip clubs, and a lot of the first instructors came from strip clubs and opened their own studios. And I love that they did include that part in the documentary, because I think a lot of pole dancers are very quick to divorce themselves from those origins, when I think it's important for like the destigmatization of stripping as well, to acknowledge like, yes, it came from stripping and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I also really love this storyline in there from like Amy's studio about a woman who ends up divorcing her husband, and I really love that storyline. I think Pole has a interesting way of allowing women to realize their worth, and this is not the first story that I've heard of a woman divorcing her husband or separating from her husband because of their journey with pole dancing, and I found that like really interesting. I felt like that was almost a better representation of the journey that pole can take you on, and what pole dancing is about, than all of Sheila's stuff kind of put together. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Stripped Down Rise Up documentary. I can't say that I would really recommend the documentary to anyone. If you do want to watch it, I would actually just say skip through all the Sheila and S Factor parts and just watch the Amy and the Janine Butterfly parts, because those parts are actually worth watching in my opinion. But yeah, like I said earlier, I'm just a bit worried and sad that maybe people will watch that documentary and kind of think that S Factor and Sheila's kind of classes are the like complete representation of what the pole community is and what pole is about, when really, in at least in my experience, that's not the case at all. I think S Factor and Sheila kind of represent such a small like percentage of the pole community as a whole, and I really hope that one day we can get a documentary that actually encompasses the whole pole community and all the diversity of like how many different styles and types of pole there are, and like the sport and the exotic, and how many different like people there are, and from all walks of life and all like different types that are part of the pole community. And hopefully, yeah, one day we get a documentary that accurately represents that. But for now, we've got Stripped Down, Rise Up, and yeah, as I've mentioned in this video, a lot of problems with that, and Sheila in particular. But anyway, thank you for watching. If you stuck through all the way to the end, this might end up being quite a long video because I did rant about Sheila for quite some time. So thank you if you managed to stick through all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please hit the like button below. That really helps me out. And if you have watched the documentary, please leave me some comments below of what you thought about it. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you picked up on anything that I maybe didn't include. Yeah, it was quite a long documentary, so there's probably a hell of a lot that I have not included in this video that you could actually like talk about. So hopefully some people will bring those up in the comments and we can have a nice discussion. I would love to create like a bit of like dialogue and debate about this whole documentary. So yeah, leave a comment if you have any thoughts, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me in the future. I post quite a bit of poll content. I also just post like random like lifestyle things that interest me, whatever I feel like making at the time, which is why we've got this video, because I watched this documentary and I was like, I was gonna just make a TikTok video on it actually, but then I was like, no, this is gonna take a while. It needs to be a YouTube video. So yeah, now I'm just rambling. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end again, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.